In the first video I made about Kaveh, I mainly talked about how his abilities and kit could align with Nilou's timeline, as he provides several useful things for that team, namely on-field Dendro infusion, self-healing, and some buffs to Bloom damage, which also make him the first 4-star character that's completely dedicated to a Bloom concept, in general. This niche he fills, however, doesn't technically extend just to Nilou, as it also creates the possibility for Kaveh-based Bloom teams. In this video, I'll analyze that, and even other team options for him, to see how valuable he could be as a character in general terms. As I said in the previous video, Kaveh's main features are his buffs to Bloom Rupture damage, and his capability to make Dendro cores explode earlier, which make him a budget Nilou. In fact, while Nilou, even at free-to-play level, can easily provide a reaction bonus of 230 for Bloom damage, Kaveh will just provide a bonus of 58% at Burst Talent level 13, and an additional bonus of 60% through his Constellation 4, which only applies to the seeds he triggers. In the same way, his capability to make seeds explode earlier is also a weaker version of what Nilou can do, since Kaveh is tied to his elemental skill and his Constellation 6, which can be used at intervals of 6 seconds and 3 seconds respectively. This still kind of makes Bloom damage backloaded for Kaveh teams, as in the worst case scenario, so in the case you don't have his Constellation 6, the playstyle won't look much different than how it is for current Bloom teams that don't feature Nilou. Secondarily, it's worth noting that the condition on his Constellation 4 is nothing to shrug off. In fact, Dendro application gets consumed less than the Hydro application in the context of a Bloom reaction, and this typically makes it harder for Dendro characters to be the trigger for Blooms, as the Dendro aura will be prevalent on opponents. This isn't as bad if you use a strong Hydro applicator such as Chincho on the team, but in general you probably can't expect more than 25% Bloom ownership from a single Dendro character, which makes his Constellation 4 look worse than what one might expect. From a team building perspective, even Constellation 6 Kaveh Bloom teams might look more like a powered up version of current Nilou-less Bloom comps, rather than a slightly weaker Nilou comp. To start off, Nilou teams have a longer window of powered up Bloom's generation, as Nilou's bountiful core effects last 30 seconds, which is typically way more than enough for it to last a single rotation. This fits pretty well with Nahida's elemental skill, which lasts 25 seconds. Nilou also isn't forced to stay on field for this buff to take effect. In comparison, Kaveh's effects are tied to his elemental burst, which has a much shorter window of 12 seconds, which become 14 against enemies such as Ruin Guards due to hit lag extension, and you're also forced to stay on field with him. Now, the second issue is not bad, unless you just prefer quick swap playstyles, as Kaveh has the right characteristics to be a Bloom driver thanks to his on-field infusion, but the first issue results in a decisive damage loss compared to Nilou teams in realistic scenarios. In fact, a nice thing about Nilou comps, which isn't necessarily tied to fixed rotation structures, is that it has very little setup requirements, and isn't really that punishing in terms of damage if you misplay a bit, thanks to how long the bountiful core effects last. Basically, even if your planned 20 or 22 seconds rotations ends up lasting longer for whatever reason, the team still provides some leeway for you to get close to an optimal damage output level, also thanks to flexible Hydro applicators such as Kokomi or Shincho. Personally, I would expect Kaveh teams, which will have more of an on-field carry structure in terms of playstyle, to be not quite as flexible. Even excluding this, by default, Nilou's longer effects make it so that even in a 20-second rotation, you'll have longer powered up Bloom uptime. So, in every scenario, Kaveh will offer smaller Bloom damage for a shorter amount of time. Kaveh's main advantage over Nilou is the same as what current Nilou-less teams have right now, namely the possibility to use non-Hydro or Dendro units on the team. Popular choices feature cryo characters to stun-lock opponents in one spot through freeze, and allow the backloaded Bloom damage to be more consistent as a result, or Anemone groupers for very crowded scenarios. Current Bloom teams that use such strategies just lack the damage to make this utility really matter, but maybe things will be slightly better with Kaveh instead. Quite honestly, calculating team damage for Bloom teams is a shot in the dark, both because it's hard to predict exact Bloom ownership, and because it's such an AoE-focused composition that it would be unfair to make assumptions based on a single target. Still, single-target scenarios do exist, and even Nilou comps really struggle there, so expect Kaveh compositions to be really disappointing in such scenarios, and anywhere from average to decent in AoE contexts. Speaking about other possible lineups, in the previous video I also talked about how, by being a Dendro on-field carry, Kaveh has access to nice lineups such as Quick Bloom, Hyper Bloom and Burgeon, which should still make him at least decent as a baseline. If you think his effects that make blooms explode earlier might ruin his viability in these comps, then don't worry, because the delay on his abilities is long enough that your Electro or Pyro characters should be able to trigger on most of the seeds before Kaveh has the chance to make them explode himself. However, he has a few issues that might make him underperform compared to other alternatives. In fact, Kaveh comes with a worrisome combination of low damage output and relatively low application for an on-field character, as his damage per rotation is not higher than 200,000, even making optimistic quicken trigger assumption, and his total application is just a bit higher than off-field Dendro applicators such as Dendro main character. This makes him both unfit for Hyper Bloom lineups with him as the only Dendro, and for Quick Bloom lineups, since their main advantage over Hyper Bloom comps is that the Dendro or Electro unit can maintain some Quicken related damage, but with Kaveh that won't be much of a benefit due to his poor output. From what I've calculated, Quick Bloom Kaveh lineups are around 40,000 DPS even with Nahida on the team, which is quite poor. Meanwhile, for Hyper Bloom comps, it would be optimistic to even expect more than 16 Hyper Blooms per rotation, while characters like Alhaitham and Nahida can easily surpass 20 in double Hydro setups. He provides something nice for Burgeon, since he has self-healing effects that activate whenever any type of Bloom reaction hits him. Burgeon teams aren't exactly the most durable, even for lineups that use Thoma as the trigger, since his shield is pretty weak if he's built with Elemental Mastery artifacts. So Kaveh being a tank driver for the team could feel more seamless than somebody like Nahida, depending on how often you have HP issues there. All in all, while Kaveh can definitely offer something unique and useful for Nilou comps, his outlook when you start to consider scenarios that don't include her isn't exactly great. This is pretty normal for 4-star characters, as they generally aren't very self-sufficient, and many of them don't even have a good niche. So for Kaveh to have one alongside Nilou, that already makes him above average among 4 stars.